That week, no one thought anything serious was going to happen. It was just another simple request. Someone lost in the forest, a small group, a familiar trail. Nothing that seemed dangerous. But what happened there wasn't fast, wasn't loud, didn't make the news. It was quiet, confusing, and it stayed in the minds of those who survived until today. This is the story of someone who entered the woods thinking they were going to help, and walked out without really understanding what they had found. That morning, he woke up earlier than usual. Not because he wanted to. It was because his phone kept vibrating on the table beside the bed, insistent, like someone on the other end was in a hurry. It was still dark. The window showed only a piece of gray sky, no sun, no clear color. He stared at the ceiling for a few seconds, trying to remember where he was, until he realized he had gone to bed late the night before. His body felt heavy. His mind was slow. He answered without even checking who was calling. On the other end, a familiar voice, tense and rushed, explained too quickly. Someone had gone into the forest late the previous afternoon and hadn't come back. They had tried calling. No answer. The family was worried. The police would take time. They needed help. He listened in silence, rubbing his face, feeling the rough stubble, the bad taste in his mouth. He said, "Okay, I'll go," almost without thinking. As he got out of bed, the house felt different. Not exactly strange, just too quiet. The refrigerator made a low humming sound. The wind tapped lightly against the window. He walked to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, drank it in one go, then another. He tried to wake his body up, but his head still felt far away. He told himself it was just another search. He had been part of others before. People got lost, got hurt, panicked. It was normal. It usually ended well. Or almost always. He grabbed his backpack from the closet. Flashlight, extra batteries, water bottle, a jacket. Everything by habit, like he was getting ready for work. On the way to the meeting point, the sky slowly began to brighten. It wasn't a nice day. It was cloudy, humid, with that smell of wet earth that comes after rain. The dirt road was full of holes, and the car bounced every few meters. He drove with one hand on the wheel, staring ahead without thinking about anything in particular. Sometimes he remembered the missing person's name. Other times, he forgot it. It felt too distant, like it had nothing to do with him. Just another favor, just another different morning. When he arrived, there were already people waiting. 4, maybe 5. Some he knew, others he didn't. Everyone looked tired, worried, fueled by weak coffee. No one talked much. They nodded, whispered quiet good mornings, without energy. One of the men quickly explained the plan. They would enter through the main trail, then split into pairs. Call the person's name. Listen for any sound. No heroics. No going alone into dangerous areas. He listened, nodded, didn't ask questions. It sounded simple, organized, safe. Before stepping into the forest, he stopped for a moment. He couldn't explain why. He stood there with the backpack on his shoulders, looking at the tall trees, the shadows between the trunks, the narrow path that disappeared after the first curve. He took a deep breath, thought about how familiar it all was, how many times he had walked there before, how many trails, how many searches. Maybe you've felt it too. That moment when everything feels too normal, too calm, right before something changes. He didn't say anything to anyone. He just adjusted the strap on his shoulder and took his first step into the forest without knowing it was the beginning of something that would follow him for a long time. Within the first few minutes inside the forest, he noticed that the air felt different, heavier, still. Outside there had been at least a little wind. In here there was nothing. It was as if everything was trapped between the trees. The sound of their steps on the damp ground felt too loud. Dry leaves cracking, thin branches snapping. Every noise seemed important. He walked beside another man, younger, who tried to look calm but kept checking his phone, even without any signal. He looked at the screen, put it away, took it out again. No one commented on it. They pretended everything was normal. The main trail was soon left behind. They entered a narrower path, almost invisible in some places. The vegetation closed in quickly. Vines, bushes, low branches. Sometimes he had to lower his head, push leaves aside with his hand. His shirt was already damp with sweat sticking to his back. The smell of the forest was strong. Earth, crushed plants, something old. In some spots it looked like someone had passed through recently. Broken leaves, marks on the ground. They crouched, looked closely, tried to understand. It could be an animal. It could be a person. Nothing was clear. They called the missing person's name from time to time, at first loudly, then more quietly, as if they felt embarrassed to shout in the middle of that silence. The voice didn't echo much. It disappeared quickly. It was strange. It felt like the forest swallowed the sound. He began to notice that he barely heard birds. No insects, nothing steady, just scattered noises. A crack here, a rustle there, then silence again. It wasn't frightening yet, just different. At one point they found something on the ground. A sneaker, covered in mud, tossed to the side near a tree. The other one wasn't there, just one. They stopped, looked at each other. The younger man picked it up carefully, as if it might break. It was worn but recognizable. It belonged to the person they were looking for. There was a photo in the group chat. No one spoke for a few seconds. It made everything feel more real. It wasn't just someone lost anymore. It was someone who had been there, alone, at some point. After that, their pace changed. They walked more slowly, paid more attention, looked around more often. He began to feel a light pressure in his chest, like he was holding his breath without noticing. He tried to convince himself it was just normal worry. But deep down, a strange feeling was growing. A vague sense that this search wasn't going like the others. That something here was out of place. And even without knowing why, he started to think that maybe they wouldn't find just a lost person in that forest. After they found the sneaker, no one walked the same way anymore. It wasn't something they agreed on, it just happened. The conversations disappeared completely. Even the random, meaningless comments were gone. Now there was only the sound of footsteps, breathing, and branches being pushed aside. The man beside him stopped checking his phone. He put it in his pocket and didn't take it out again. He walked with alert eyes, turning his head at every noise. Sometimes he stopped for no reason, just to listen. They would stand there, motionless, for a few seconds, until they realized nothing was clear. Then they moved on. The terrain began to change. The trail almost disappeared. In some places it felt like they were walking in circles, passing similar trees, identical rocks. Ground marks that looked like ones they had already seen. He didn't say anything, but he felt that more than once. He checked his watch. They had been inside for over 2 hours. Time felt strange. It moved too fast and too slow at the same time. His body grew tired, but his mind never rested. It stayed alert, waiting for some sign. At one point, he clearly thought he heard footsteps behind them. They weren't their own. They were different, lighter, more spaced out. He stopped without warning. The other man almost bumped into him. They stood still. The sound continued for a few seconds, then disappeared. No animal appeared. No person, just silence again. The younger man whispered, asking if he had heard it too. He said yes. They tried to laugh to say it was probably an animal, but neither of them really believed it. Not long after, the radio crackled. One of the other groups said they had heard someone screaming farther north. A weak, distant voice, no clear words, just a human sound lost in the forest. The leader told everyone to move toward that point. They changed direction. The walk became harder. Uphill paths, rocks, slippery roots. At one spot, he almost fell. He grabbed a branch by instinct. His heart raced. It took a few seconds to calm down. As he walked, strange thoughts started to fill his head. He wondered if the missing person was still alive, if they were injured, how long they had been alone. What goes through someone's mind when they're lost in a place like that, with no signal, no help, no direction? Maybe you've imagined something like that before. What it would be like to be trapped somewhere, not knowing if anyone will ever find you. He tried to push those thoughts away, but they kept coming back. When they got closer to the place the radio had mentioned, they noticed something was wrong. There were no clear signs of anyone, no movement, No answers to their calls, just trees, rocks, shadows, and in the middle of it all, an uncomfortable feeling that they were being watched. It wasn't fear yet. It was something quieter, deeper, as if the forest itself was paying attention to them now. They reached the spot mentioned on the radio in the middle of the afternoon. The sky, which had been overcast since morning, looked even darker inside the forest. The light came in weakly, broken by the branches. It was hard to tell what time it was just by looking around. The air was heavy and still. His shirt was completely soaked with sweat. His legs ached. His left knee started to hurt with every downhill step. But no one talked about stopping. Not now. They called the missing person's name again and again. They shouted, waited, shouted again. Sometimes it felt like someone was answering, a distant sound, a strange echo. But when they listened closely, they realized it was probably just wind moving through the leaves, or a branch shifting. It played tricks on their minds. It gave them hope for a few seconds, and then took it away. At one point, they found a backpack. It was open, lying near a large rock. Inside, there was an empty bottle, a crushed pack of cookies, a thin jacket. Everything was dirty. Everything was out of place. It didn't look like a normal abandonment. It looked rushed. It looked confused, like someone had stopped there in panic, rummaged through their things, and left without thinking. No one wanted to touch it. They just looked at it, in silence. That was when the radio started to fail. First just static, then broken voices, half sentences. They tried to talk to the other groups, but the responses came distorted, distant, as if they were somewhere else. At one point, they heard someone say, "There's someone here," and then nothing. Complete silence. They tried again. Nothing. The radio became just a useless object in his hand. Not long after, they realized they had gotten separated from the others without noticing. They didn't know exactly when it happened. They only understood it when they stopped to rest and looked around. There was no one else nearby, no voices, no signs, just the two of them, and the closed-in forest. The younger man started to panic. He walked back and forth, breathed fast, kept asking if they were on the right path. He tried to calm him down, said yes, that they would find the others, but deep down he wasn't sure. When they started walking again, they clearly heard a scream. This time it didn't sound like wind or an echo. It was a human voice, weak, desperate, coming from somewhere ahead. They looked at each other. Without saying a word, they picked up the pace. They ignored the exhaustion, the pain, the fear. They just wanted to get there. They just wanted to find someone alive. Without knowing that, by following that voice, they were moving farther and farther away from any easy way out. They followed the voice for almost 40 minutes. At least that's what it felt like. No one was really keeping track of time. They walked fast when they could, ran in some stretches, slipped in others. Their legs no longer responded the way they had before. Their breathing was short and heavy. Their chests burned. Even so, they didn't stop. Every time the sound came back, weaker, farther away, they felt a rush of hope. "It's close," the younger man said, almost like he was begging. He didn't answer. He just kept going. At some point, the screaming stopped. It just stopped, like someone had turned off a switch. They froze, stared ahead, waited to hear it again. Nothing. They called out. No answer. He felt a strange chill crawl up his back. It wasn't from the cold, it was something else. A bad feeling, hard to explain. Like realizing you've walked into the wrong place, but you've gone too far to turn back easily. They walked a few more minutes in silence. Then they saw something between the trees. At first it looked like a pile of clothes on the ground. Then, as they got closer, they realized it was someone sitting against a tree trunk, head lowered, arms hanging loosely at their sides. It was the person they had been looking for. They were alive. At least they were breathing, but they didn't react. He knelt in front of them, called their name, touched their shoulder. The person slowly lifted their face. Their eyes were open but empty, lost, like they weren't really there. Their mouth moved but no sound came out. Their whole body was shaking. They were dirty, scratched, far too thin for the time they had been gone. They looked like someone who had been there for days, not just one night. When they finally managed to make them speak, the voice came out weak and broken. The words were out of order. They said they had heard someone calling, that they had followed it, that they thought it was them, that every time they got close the voice moved, came from somewhere else deeper in the forest. They said they tried to go back but always ended up in the same place, the same area, like they had been walking in circles without realizing it. As he listened, his stomach tightened. It wasn't just pity, it was fear. Fear of realizing they had done the same thing. Followed sounds, followed signs, followed paths that might not have really existed. Maybe you felt something like that before, when you realize you trusted something too much without knowing if it was real. They tried to lift the person up. It was hard. They could barely stand. They had to support them on both sides. They started walking back, choosing any direction that looked different from the others. They walked for hours. Night fell. They used their flashlight. They shouted. Finally, they heard real voices, real flashlights, real people. They were found almost by accident near a small stream. Days later, at home, he still woke up at night thinking about that voice, wondering if it had been his imagination, wondering if someone had really called, wondering if somewhere in that forest there was still something that could trick people using nothing but sound. He never went back there. He never joined another search in that place. And even today, when he hears someone calling his name in the dark, he waits a few seconds before answering. After that day, his life went on. Work, home, family, bills, routine. Nothing changed on the outside. From a distance, no one could see any difference. But inside, he knew he wasn't the same anymore. Some simple things started to bother him. Too much silence, isolated places, long paths with no people around. It wasn't obvious fear. It was caution. It was awareness. It was memory. Sometimes people asked about that search, about the forest, about the person they found. He answered briefly, said it had been exhausting, that it had been hard, that it had ended well. Then he changed the subject. He didn't like going into details, because every time he did, he remembered the voice. He remembered the empty look in those eyes. He remembered the feeling of walking without knowing if he was moving forward or backward. Over time, he realized that many stories like that never become news. They don't become documentaries. They don't become reports. They stay only in the minds of the people who lived them, people who enter places thinking they'll come back quickly and return different, quieter, more cautious, more aware of things that can't be easily explained. Maybe, at some point in your life, you felt something similar. A place that seemed normal, a sound that seemed ordinary, a situation that felt safe, until it wasn't. Experiences like that don't become visible trauma. They become invisible scars, the kind that only hurt at certain moments. If this story made you think, remember something, or feel that quiet discomfort you can't quite explain, it's worth holding on to. And if you'd like, you can share it in the comments. Sometimes hearing other people's stories helps us understand our own. And if you want to stay for more stories like this, just stick around. There are always more things that silence hasn't told yet.